In January 1947, Los Angeles was a city transformed by war and ambition. The Second World War had ended just 18 months earlier, and America stood victorious, yet restless. Millions of servicemen had returned home, many of them drifting to California's coast, drawn by promises of sunshine, opportunity, and a fresh start. Los Angeles, more than any other city in American history, embodied the post-war dream. Its population had exploded during the war years, swelling from 1.5 million in 1940 to nearly 2 million by 1947. Hollywood churned out films at a frantic pace, projecting images of glamour and success to a nation hungry for escapism after years of rationing and fear. Yet beneath the glossy surface, LA was a city of stark contrasts and deep shadows. The same streets that hosted movie premieres by night became hunting grounds for a different kind of predator. The Los Angeles Police Department, though well-funded and equipped, was notoriously corrupt. Officers took bribes from organized crime syndicates that controlled gambling, prostitution, and narcotics throughout the city. The district attorney's office was compromised. Judges could be bought. Evidence could disappear. In this era, the wealthy and well-connected operated above the law, their crimes protected by a network of payoffs and political favors. The post-war period had also brought a dark undercurrent to American culture: film noir. Movies like Double Indemnity, The Maltese Falcon, and The Big Sleep depicted a world of moral ambiguity, where femme fatales lured men to their doom, and private detectives navigated urban jungles of crime and corruption. Los Angeles itself became noir's greatest character, a city of perpetual sunshine that somehow cast the darkest shadows. It was into this world of dreams and nightmares, of Hollywood fantasy and street-level brutality, that a young woman named Elizabeth Short had come seeking stardom. What she found, instead, would make her famous in death in ways she never achieved in life.
Wednesday, January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles. The morning broke gray and cold over Leimert Park, a respectable residential neighborhood in South LA. Betty Bersinger, a young mother, pushed her 3-year-old daughter in a stroller along Norton Avenue, heading toward a shoe repair shop a few blocks away. It was shortly after 10 o'clock when she noticed something pale lying in a vacant lot 30 feet from the sidewalk. At first glance, she thought it was a discarded department store mannequin, the kind shops threw out when they updated their window displays. Los Angeles was full of such cast-offs, debris from the dream factory. But as she drew closer, wheeling the stroller nearer to the lot's edge, details emerged that made her breath catch in her throat. Betty Bersinger had stumbled upon what would become the most infamous unsolved murder in American history. The body lying in that vacant lot belonged to 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a young woman who had come to Los Angeles with dreams of Hollywood stardom. She never landed a significant role, never saw her name on a movie marquee, never achieved the fame she desperately sought. But in death, she would become more famous than she ever imagined, immortalized not as an actress, but as a cautionary tale. The newspapers would give her a name that would echo through decades: the Black Dahlia. The brutality of her murder would shock a city that thought it had seen everything. The investigation would expose corruption at the highest levels of LA law enforcement, and 77 years later, her killer's identity remains one of the 20th century's greatest mysteries. This is the story of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and the city that devoured her dreams.
Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters in a family that knew poverty intimately. Her father, Cleo Short, worked as a miniature golf course designer during the brief period when such courses were a national craze. But when the Great Depression hit in 1929, the bottom fell out of the miniature golf business. In 1930, when Elizabeth was just 6 years old, Cleo abandoned the family. He left his car on a bridge in a staged suicide, then disappeared to California to start a new life, leaving his wife Phoebe to raise 5 young girls alone. Phoebe worked as a bookkeeper, earning barely enough to keep the family fed and housed. They moved frequently, always one step ahead of eviction. Elizabeth grew up acutely aware that they were different from other families, poorer, more precarious, marked by her father's abandonment. She developed asthma as a child, a condition that would plague her throughout her short life. Doctors recommended she move to a warmer, drier climate. As a teenager, Elizabeth was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. She had pale skin, dark hair, and a quality that photographs captured well, a dreamy, wistful expression that suggested she was always somewhere else in her mind. She loved movies, spending hours in darkened theaters, watching actresses like Rita Hayworth and Veronica Lake transform themselves into goddesses on screen. She studied their gestures, their voices, their style. She believed, as so many young women believed, that beauty and determination could be currency enough to buy a ticket to a better life. In 1943, at 19 years old, Elizabeth Short made the decision that shaped the rest of her brief existence. She would go to California. She would go to Hollywood. She would become a star.
Elizabeth arrived in Los Angeles in 1943 with almost no money, no connections, and no concrete plan beyond a vague belief that she was destined for stardom. Reality proved harsher than her dreams. She never landed a significant acting role. A few days' work as an extra, appearing as a blurred face in a crowd scene, walking past the camera in someone else's story. That was the extent of her Hollywood career. The studios weren't interested. She had no training, no agent, no patron willing to open doors. What she did have was beauty, and in post-war Los Angeles, that was both currency and trap. Elizabeth became a familiar figure in the bars, nightclubs, and restaurants of Hollywood and downtown LA. The Florentine Gardens, the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge, the Biltmore Hotel's lobby. She moved through these spaces like a ghost, always immaculately dressed despite having almost nothing, always hoping tonight would be the night someone important noticed her. She developed a distinctive style. She wore black dresses, black suits, black accessories. Her hair, which she dyed black, fell in waves to her shoulders. She favored deep red lipstick. The effect was striking, dramatic, memorable. Later, after her death, the newspapers would claim she was called the Black Dahlia in life, but this was invention. In life, she was simply Betty to her friends, Beth to her family. She survived by depending on the kindness and sometimes the exploitation of men. She stayed with various boyfriends, moving from apartment to apartment when relationships soured. She lived briefly at the home of Mark Hansen, a nightclub and theater owner who let her stay in exchange for unclear arrangements. She wrote letters home to her mother, always optimistic, always claiming that success was just around the corner. The letters were lies, kind lies, meant to shield her mother from the truth. Elizabeth Short was drowning.
The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive occurred on the evening of January 9, 1947. She was seen in the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel at 715 South Olive Street in downtown Los Angeles. The Biltmore was one of LA's grandest hotels, an Art Deco masterpiece that had hosted Academy Award ceremonies and attracted Hollywood's elite. Elizabeth had no room there. She couldn't afford such luxury, but she often spent time in the lobby, a public space where a well-dressed woman could sit without drawing suspicion. A hotel employee later told police he had seen her that evening around 10 o'clock. She had been making a phone call from one of the lobby's payphones. When asked where she was going, he had told him she was going to meet her sister at a nearby drugstore. This was a lie. Her sister was in Massachusetts, 3,000 miles away. After leaving the Biltmore, Elizabeth Short vanished. For 5 days, from January 9th to January 14th, no one knew where she was or who she was with. These 5 days remain the darkest mystery of the Black Dahlia case. Police would later determine that she had been kept captive somewhere during this period. She had been tortured. Evidence suggested she had been kept alive for at least 2 or 3 days while her captor inflicted systematic brutality upon her body. She had been burned with cigarettes. She had been bound with rope that left deep marks on her wrists and ankles. She had been cut, beaten, and violated in ways that investigators struggled to document without becoming physically ill. The coroner would later estimate that she died sometime on the night of January 14th or the early morning hours of January 15th. By the time Betty Bersinger found her body, Elizabeth had been dead for less than 12 hours. At approximately 10 o'clock on the morning of January 15, 1947, Betty Bersinger made the discovery that would traumatize her for the rest of her life. The body had been carefully positioned in the vacant lot at 3825 South Norton Avenue. It had been placed there deliberately, posed like a grotesque work of art. The body had been severed cleanly at half at the waist, the 2 sections separated by approximately 1 foot. Medical examiners would later determine that the bisection had been performed with surgical precision, likely using a tool designed for that purpose. The upper half lay with arms raised above the head. The lower half had been arranged with legs spread apart in a V shape. The entire body had been drained of blood. Not a drop remained at the scene. This indicated that Elizabeth had been killed elsewhere, mutilated elsewhere, washed clean, and then transported to this location for display. Her face bore the most disturbing injuries. Cuts extended from the corners of her mouth to her ears on both sides, an injury sometimes called a Glasgow smile. These wounds would have caused unimaginable pain. Medical evidence suggested she might still have been alive when this mutilation occurred. Additional cuts and abrasions covered her body. Patches of skin had been removed from her thighs. Rope marks encircled her wrists, ankles, and neck, indicating prolonged restraint. Betty Bersinger, pushing her daughter's stroller, approached the body believing it to be a mannequin. When recognition struck, this was human flesh. This was a woman. This had been a person. She screamed and ran to a nearby house to phone police. Within minutes, squad cars converged on Norton Avenue. Within an hour, over a dozen LAPD detectives stood in the vacant lot, staring at a crime scene unlike anything they had encountered before. One detective later told reporters it was the most brutal murder he had seen in 25 years with the department.
The Los Angeles Police Department launched what would become the largest investigation in its history. Over 150 officers were assigned to the case. Detectives interviewed more than 500 people in the first month alone. They pursued leads across the city,
tracking Elizabeth's movements, identifying everyone who knew her, mapping her final weeks. The LAPD's investigation was thorough in scope, but hampered by corruption and incompetence. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Suspects with powerful connections were quietly cleared without proper investigation. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles newspapers turned the murder into a media circus. The Hearst papers, the LA Examiner and the LA Herald Express, engaged in a grotesque competition to sensationalize every detail. They published photographs of Elizabeth, calling her beautiful, tragic, a victim of Hollywood's dark underbelly. They invented details about her life, turning her into a femme fatale, when in truth she had been a struggling woman with few options. It was a newspaper editor who gave her the name that would make her immortal, the Black Dahlia. The moniker was inspired by a film noir movie from the previous year, The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. Elizabeth's preference for black clothing and her dark hair made the connection irresistible for journalists seeking a catchy headline. The name stuck. Within days, Black Dahlia appeared in newspapers across America. The case became a national obsession. Radio programs discussed it. People debated theories in bars and diners. And then, 10 days after the murder, something extraordinary happened. A package arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside were Elizabeth Short's belongings, her Social Security card, her birth certificate, photographs, and an address book. The items had been carefully washed in gasoline, presumably to eliminate fingerprints. A note, constructed from letters cut out of newspapers, accompanied the package. Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow. Of the dozens of suspects investigated over 77 years, one name stands above all others: Dr. George Hill Hodel. Hodel was a successful Los Angeles physician, brilliant and wealthy, living in an avant-garde mansion in the Hollywood Hills, designed in the Mayan Revival style by architect Lloyd Wright. He moved in elite circles, hosting parties attended by artists, musicians, and Hollywood figures. He was a man of culture and sophistication. He was also, by multiple accounts, a sadistic sexual predator. Hodel had medical training that would have equipped him to perform the precise bisection found on Elizabeth Short's body. He possessed surgical instruments. His home included a basement with concrete floors that could easily be cleaned of blood. Most damningly, he frequented the same Hollywood nightclubs and bars where Elizabeth Short spent her evenings seeking opportunities and companionship. In 1949, 2 years after the murder, Hodel's teenage daughter accused him of sexual abuse. The district attorney's office investigated, but ultimately declined to prosecute. Hodel's connections protected him. During this investigation, LAPD detectives planted listening devices in Hodel's home as part of a separate inquiry. The recordings captured deeply disturbing conversations. In one recording, Hodel can be heard saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." In another conversation discussing the ongoing surveillance, he says, "They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her." These recordings were never used in court. Shortly after the investigation into his daughter's allegations collapsed, Hodel left Los Angeles. He moved to Hawaii, then later to the Philippines and other countries in Asia. He lived abroad for decades, never returning permanently to the United States. He died in 1999, age 91, having never been charged with any crime.
The strongest evidence linking George Hodel to the Black Dahlia murder emerged years after his death, when his son brought his own investigation to light. Steve Hodel was a detective with the LAPD for over 20 years, retiring in 1986. After his father's death,
Steve discovered photographs in his father's possessions that appeared to show Elizabeth Short alive in poses similar to how her body had been positioned after death. He also uncovered evidence suggesting his father may have been responsible for other unsolved murders during the same period. Steve Hodel published his findings in 2003 in a book titled Black Dahlia Avenger. He presented handwriting analysis comparing his father's writing to notes sent to newspapers after the murder. He highlighted his father's medical expertise, his proximity to Elizabeth Short in the weeks before her death, and the LAPD surveillance recordings. He argued that his father had not only killed Elizabeth Short, but had gotten away with it because the LAPD and District Attorney's Office were too corrupt and intimidated to pursue a suspect with wealth and powerful connections. The LAPD has never formally named George Hodel as a suspect, but many former detectives who worked the case have privately stated they believe he was responsible. Modern criminal profilers who have reviewed the evidence tend to agree that the killer possessed medical knowledge, had access to a private location where he could hold and torture a victim for days, and deliberately pose the body as a message or artistic statement. George Hodel fits this profile perfectly. Yet, because he was never charged, never tried, and is now dead, the Black Dahlia case remains officially unsolved. Elizabeth Short's murder is listed as a cold case, one of thousands in Los Angeles.
77 years have passed since Elizabeth Short's body was discovered in that vacant lot on Norton Avenue. The neighborhood has changed. Los Angeles has grown into a sprawling metropolis of nearly 4 million people. The Biltmore Hotel still stands, though its grandeur has faded. The nightclubs where Elizabeth once sought her big break have long since closed or transformed into something else. Yet the Black Dahlia case endures in American consciousness. It has inspired dozens of books, multiple films, countless television documentaries and podcasts. It has become synonymous with L.A. Noir, with the dark underbelly of Hollywood dream. It represents a particular moment in American history, post-war, morally ambiguous, caught between victory and anxiety. Elizabeth Short never achieved her dream of seeing her name in lights, but she became more famous in death than most Hollywood stars achieve in life. Her story reminds us that Los Angeles, for all its sunshine and promise, has always been a city of shadows. For every success story, there are thousands of Elizabeth Shorts, young people who came seeking stardom and found only disappointment, exploitation, or worse. The case also stands as an indictment of corruption. If George Hodel was indeed the killer, he escaped justice because wealth and connections placed him beyond the law. The LAPD knew. The District Attorney's Office knew. But knowing and proving are different things, and in 1947 Los Angeles, certain people were simply untouchable. Elizabeth Short lies buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. Her grave is marked with a simple headstone bearing her birth name. Visitors still leave flowers, black dahlias when they can find them. Was George Hodel truly the Black Dahlia's killer? Could modern forensic technology, DNA analysis, advanced imaging finally solve this 77-year-old mystery? Or will Elizabeth Short's murderer remain forever in the shadows, protected by time, corruption, and death? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're fascinated by the dark intersections of Hollywood glamour, post-war America, and unsolved murder mysteries, subscribe to Fog-Bound Mysteries. We explore real crimes from history's darkest corners, from Victorian London to 1940s Los Angeles, from Georgian Edinburgh to Cold War Berlin.
These are the murders that changed cities, the killers who escaped justice, and the victims whose stories deserve to be remembered. Every case is meticulously researched and told with dignity, accuracy, and respect for those who suffered. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And until next time, remember the victims, question the past, and join us in the shadows of history. Thank you for watching.